Here at Pizzeria DeLoro, they sell over 40,000 pizzas every single year, generating over $1.5 million in revenue. And in spending just a few hours there, they taught me more than I've learned in the past 2 years about making restaurant quality pizza. So today I'm going to share with you 5 tips that any home cook can use to instantly level up their pizza without having to spend years working at a pizzeria. And we're going to start with the #1 mistake that most home cooks are making. You see, at Pizzeria DeLoro, they confirmed one thing that I've been preaching to all of my students, that'll instantly make your pizza taste 100 times better. And more importantly, get you one step closer to making restaurant quality pizza without needing all that special equipment that they use. So you'll often hear people say that the reason restaurant pizza is better than home cooked pizza is because restaurants have access to better ingredients than we do as home cooks. And while it may be true that restaurants have access to some different brands of things like cheese and pepperoni, that's not what's stopping you from making great pizza. I mean, I can tell you based on my time working at a pizzeria that most pizzerias are not using the highest quality ingredients. In fact, they're probably using ingredients that are far worse than what you could even find online or at your local grocery store or farmer's market. However, this is where Pizzeria DeLoro does things a little bit differently, but they don't just buy the most expensive ingredients they can find. To get the exact flavor they're looking for, they put a lot of thought into each and everything that goes into their pizza. And while some of their ingredients are on the more expensive side, that's not why they chose those ingredients specifically. For example, the flour is the most artisan they could find. The cheese allows them to get that nice buttery, melty texture. And for the sauce, they use a blend of 2 different tomato products to get the exact flavor and texture that they're looking for. However, as a home cook, you might not have access to all the same brands that Pizzeria DeLoro does, but you don't have to. So let me show you how you can make the same restaurant quality pizza without having to copy their exact recipe. And basically, it all just comes down to testing out what you do have access to and seeing what you like best. And while that process can take some experimenting and searching, it's 100% worth the effort. However, to save you some time and money, I actually put together a guide of all my favorite ingredients, which you can access using the link in the description below. It includes everything from flour to cheese to tomatoes to pepperoni and other toppings. Because as great as New York style pizza is, there are a few things they do differently here at Pizzeria DeLoro that allow them to make something that they believe is even better. And there's one thing in particular that makes the biggest difference to that. So when I set out to develop my perfect New York style pizza recipe, it took me a long time to figure out how to develop its signature texture. I'm talking about that soft, foldable slice combined with that satisfying, crisp yet chewy bite. And no matter how much I played around with the dough hydration, baking methods, and temperatures, it was never quite right. Sometimes my dough was too soft, sometimes it was too flat, and sometimes it was just a soggy mess. Until one day, I figured it out. There's one thing that all New York City pizzerias use that without it makes their pizza impossible to replicate. And I'm not talking about the water. High gluten flour is what ultimately helps me to get my perfect result. But that's not what they use at Pizzeria DeLoro. In fact, it's quite the opposite. They use an all-purpose flour, which is actually relatively low gluten. So why is that? Well, you'll notice that while Pizzeria DeLoro's pies look a lot like New York style, when you bite into them, there's something different about them. Because while they do a lot of things similar to New York style, they prefer all-purpose flour over high gluten because it gives the dough a softer and more tender texture that honestly makes it pretty hard to stop eating. That is at least when combined with one other crucial technique they swear by, which the owner Adam says is what really sets their pizza apart. And it is great pizza. I definitely ate way too much of it while I was there, which is tough because I'm currently trying to lean out a bit, so I need to watch what I'm eating. But one thing that's helped with that is Thrive Market, who is kind enough to sponsor this video. Thrive Market is an online membership-based grocery store that delivers the highest quality products straight to your door. So one of my favorite things I got in my most recent Thrive box are these Bonza chickpea-based noodles. They're high in fiber and protein, which is very important to me so I can avoid losing muscle as I lose weight. But of course, we all need some guilty pleasure snacks too, which for me are these olive oil fried chips. They're super delicious and they don't make me feel guilty like I would eating the usual ultra-processed chip brands that are made with harmful ingredients like artificial flavors, sweeteners, and colors. The Thrive Market carries a ton of organic groceries with trusted ingredients, including these low sugar and high protein options. In fact, you can shop by over 90 diets and values depending on your goals and preferences. They even have healthy treats for your furry friends too, so I got a little something here for my dog Teddy. So visit thrivemarket.com/Charlie Anderson or scan the QR code on screen to join Thrive Market today and get 30% off your first order and a free gift worth up to $60. Thanks again to Thrive Market for sponsoring this video, and thank you for your support. Now let's get into that next crucial tip that Adam swears by, which allows him to make some of the best pizza in Ohio. So imagine for a second that you're about to paint a masterpiece. There are basically 2 approaches you could take. The first is you could get it done fast, quickly slapping on paint, and what you create might look good at first glance, but it'll be lacking detail up close. strokes. However, if you take your time, carefully layering each brush stroke, the final result becomes a beautiful work of art. Well, believe it or not, that same principle applies to pizza. Because as your dough ferments, there are a lot of complex reactions going on. One is that the starches are broken down, creating gases that give the rise to your dough. But at the same time, the gluten proteins are being broken down, creating acids and other flavorful compounds, and giving the dough a more tender texture. But the thing is that these flavor-producing reactions take time. While the gas production can happen quickly or slowly depending on how much yeast you add, the gluten proteins simply can't be broken down over a short period of time. So the solution? Well, at Pizzeria DeLoro, they let their dough ferment for anywhere from 48 to 96 hours. And in order to do this without the dough blowing up out of control, they use a very small amount of yeast. Just about 0.2% is a baker's percentage. This allows those gas-producing reactions to occur very slowly, all while the gluten is being broken down, creating that incredible complex flavor and texture. However, everything we've done up until this point could be for nothing if we don't get this next step right. Because it may seem like you've already done the majority of the work once your dough is balled up, but I've seen firsthand just how wrong that is. You see, when I went to Pizzeria DeLoro, they were nice enough to let me try a variety of different pizzas. They made a delicious classic cheese pizza as well as a white pie, but when it came time to make a margarita pizza, they let me give it a shot. So I stretched the dough the way I typically do for the style of pizza I make, being sure to form a nice airy crust as I press out the dough, then picking it up and tossing it back and forth before finally stretching it the rest of the way by hand. And by the time it went in the oven, it looked pretty solid. However, as soon as I bit into it, I could tell something was different. I mean, it barely even seemed like the same dough I had eaten just a few minutes before. It turns out that, due to the stretching technique I used, my crust turned out quite a bit thicker than the one that Leo, the head dough master here at Pizzeria DeLoro, had made for me earlier. Because of that, there was also less dough on the interior of my pizza, which has a bigger impact than you might think. It not only changes the way the sauce and toppings cook, but it gives the crust a completely different bite and texture. So where I pushed a lot of the dough all the way to the edges of the crust, Leo aimed for a more uniform thickness all throughout, which led to that more subtle, traditional New York style crust. However, this was only the beginning of the massive differences that technique can make. And in fact, my mind was about to be blown even further. You see, by again just simply changing the fermentation and stretching process they use, Pizzeria DeLoro makes pan pizzas using the exact same dough they use for their round pies. And they use one method in particular that allows them to achieve this super soft, pillowy pizza unlike anything I'd ever eaten before. And I actually broke down that technique in detail here, and I showed you exactly how you can replicate it at home. So click here to check it out, and I'll see you over there.